Now, for the record, this article is based on another one called The Pixar Fury. The courtesy of Pixar. Back in July, John Negroni went down an animated wormhole with his grand unfilled fury of Pixar, and absolutely obscurity close to reading the studio's canon that weaves together of its 14 feature films to create the world that stretches several thousands of years into the future, only to eventually loop back upon itself. Negroni has sensed his original fury for his state. But, of course, the longer version of the article is on Negroni's personal blog. The grand unfined theory of Pixar is a long tale, spanning centuries of struggle of the domination of the earth along humans, animals, and human-like consciousness. And the scientists animate objects, AI machines. The fury begins with the end of Brave, the studio's 13th feature film that falls at the very beginning of the animated universe of chronologically as we all know. It's in Brave, set in the Middle Ages, where moviegoers find the character that they had first met with a more decade before seemingly unrelated film set several millennia into the future. At the far end of the Pixar timeline, but we're getting several thousands of animated years ahead of ourselves. Before we get there and we go back, there's the first thing we need to go over the major things that we need to take from Brave to tell the larger Pixar Fury. One is this world is filled with magic. The witches have the power to cast spells and turn humans into animals. The powers can also be used to manipulate animate objects. 2. The witch, as witches tend to do, behaves oddly, disappearing behind doors and obsessing over wood. So what happens to the animals in the witch experiments on? They repopulate, and thanks to the evolution, they slowly and surely become increasingly more human than ever the centuries that follow. The next movie in the universe's timeline is The Incredibles, which is this film set to 1950s and 60s and falls 9 or so centuries after Brave on Pixar timeline. Here we meet a super breed of humans that were cinematically wiped out of the course of 2 decades. Significant fury as far as concern a matter with their demise, Buddy, aka Syndrome, who lacks superpowers himself. He relies on super advanced technology in order to seek his revenge against Mr. Incredible and his family. Buddy invents the Amadroid, an artificially intelligent henchman that gradually grows and adapts into the point that is possible to destroy by the remote that controls it, allowing it to betray Syndrome and ultimately be defeated by the Incredibles. Buddy also has a harness 0-point energy, which is way ahead of its time, but we'll get to that later. This marks the beginning of the rise of the AI machines. The Amadroid and Syndrome's other advanced technologies have learned that force doesn't work when trying to control humans. Instead, over the next few decades, the machines launch an industrial revolution, building a faceless corporation called By and Large, which they use to dominate the consumer-obsessed humans. Next comes Toy Story. We then discover that the toys have somehow become sentient and operate by rules to please humans. We also learn that B&L builds the batteries that power Buzz Lightyear. In Toy Story 2, we found out that Woody comes from a popular show in the 50s, and that his toy line was discontinued. Something Jessie and Stinky Pete were aware, but Woody was not. Why? Because the AI machines use 0-point energy that gradually induced the life of animate objects, including the toys. Since B&L came from being Woody's roundup, Woody would have no recollection of this. The next movie in the timeline is Ratatouille. Movie taking place in 2007 in Paris. Animals are beginning to experiment with human activities such as cooking. The rebellion against their instincts show us the descendants of the humans turned animals from Brave that made it from Scotland to France. The the plot highlights a growing animosity between animals and humans. This brings us to the next movie on the timeline, Finding Nemo, which it takes place roughly around the same time as Toy Story 3. We all know because Molly, Andy's sister, is reading a magazine with Darla on the cover. This is the same Darla from Finding Nemo, and she hasn't aged. Finding Nemo continues to explore animosity between animals and humans, but also shows us the result of growing intelligence amongst animals. Sharks are trying to be vegetarians, fish are trying to help the others across an entire ocean network, and animals are trying to get out of their tanks and cages. Before all this comes to a head, we have to acknowledge Toy Story 3, that takes place in 2010. This movie really delivers a point to the toys where they'll do anything for their owners, even if it means losing their purpose and happiness. This bonds between the objects set in the human's tone for what's about to happen next. The next movie in the timeline is Up, which it takes place years after Toy Story 3. We all know this because there's a postcard from Carl and Ellie in Andy's bedroom. That means that Ellie is still alive and the events of Up have not yet happened. Up is extremely important because we finally see BNL taking over. Carl is forced out of his house by a corporation that's trying to expand the city. Even more importantly, we find Charles Muntz has invented collars that will allow him to hear the thoughts of his dogs. It's likely the events of Ratatouille that happened in plenty of other places, giving Muntz the idea to obnoxious to be accomplished by more effectively by animals since he's tracking a bird. The implication of this technology is humans are being overstepped to their bounds with animals, causing an imbalance of nature. We don't know exactly what happens between animals and humans, but we do know that the machines take over completely in WALL-E, in which it's centuries later. We learn that BNL takes place all over the world governments and exiles humans to space so that they can clean up the mess that they've made from pollution. We don't see what the planet looks like before the humans leave, which means BNL would have exiled the humans in an effort to curb in intelligence and growing the combination of animals. The next movie timeline is Cars, which explores a familiar Earth being populated by machines with human qualities. Strangely, very few animals exist because of this. The only problem was the machines running the Earth. However, is that the planet drained of resources? A problem addressed in Cars 2, BNL realized that Earth is useless. Because of this, it abandons the planet entirely. The result of barren wasteland. 700 years later in WALL-E, we find a robot named BNL left behind and that is still trying to fulfill his programming. WALL-E likely survived because of his gluttony. He scavenged parts to stay running, befriends a cockroach, and watches the old movies. For some reason, the toy seems to stay alive because the love of humans. So does WALL-E. He discovers the last shred of life on Earth and travels to Ebnock to be with Eve. The only problem is that Exnom is run by the autopilot, an AI of course, and tries to stop WALL-E from freeing the humans with their dependence on machines. WALL-E elaborates humans and then will rebuild the society on Earth. In the credits, we see that no plant life, last bit of it, has grown into a mighty tree. And next we see the tree on the island in Bug's Life, where we find the animals living separately from humans, something we never see in other Pixar films, incorporating human activities such as cities and circus in their lifestyle. Because Earth was terribly polluted, animals have begun to mutate as a result of adaptation, and they have progressed in the past over humans and overshadowed to their limited pollution. As a result, humans die out and the animals become a dominant species. After 1,000 years, animals become the monsters and the super species we see in Monsters University and Monsters Inc. The only problem is that the humans are the resource for machines, means of energy. So the monsters have an energy crisis without them. So the monsters invent the time-traveling door that will allow them to harvest energy from humans in the past. To prevent monsters from changing time, they are taught to believe humans are toxic and that they can't alter the world. Only a few monsters that at the top know about this time travel, carving in the witch's cabin. As a result, Sully becomes attracted to a human child named Mary, or Boo, who grows to love them. When Sully eventually disappears, Boo becomes obsessed when trying to find him. Because of her time in the monster world, she knows the doors are the key. So Boo finds a way to use the wood as means of time travel. Using the doors, she becomes a witch, traveling across time to find Sully, not realizing that she was in a millennia ahead of her. So Boo goes backwards, believing that finding the source of its magic will make her powerful enough to find him. She is the witch from Brave. Her love for Sully actually the crux of Pixar universe. Note that Pixar J. Ward has responded to John Negroni's Fury. I think somebody had a lot of time on their hands. And that, my pretties, was the Pixar Fury. A Pixar Theorypasta. Yeah, my final thoughts on this story. This is actually a pretty good Theorypasta, I'm not gonna lie. This is actually a really good Theorypasta involving the Pixar of Disney. Now, this one did tell a story, some theories of, what's going on in these Pixar movies, such as, Monsters, Inc., The Incredibles, and a lot of that. I honestly can see it being very believable, as this, honestly, is a pretty well-made story. Especially with the whole, idea of why these... well, pardon me about that. I'm just a little tired. But I could definitely say it's a pretty interesting concept for a story. And I definitely gotta say it honestly brings out a pretty good, interesting idea for a movie itself. So with that being said, and with that being the case, I honestly thought this was actually a pretty awesome story. I mean, all these theories could actually be possible of why the characters are the way they are. It honestly has a really great Fury idea. I definitely really have to say, this all could be really possible. Now, the only narrations of this story was from Space Voyager, who did narrate, I believe, in 2019 or 2020, because I know he re-uploaded this one in 2020. I do know Dave the Useless also narrated this one, but I don't really understand why people didn't narrate this one. I mean, all this Fury stuff could honestly be possible of why everything went out the way they did. But despite that, I honestly still thought it was a pretty awesome movie. So with that being the case, that being said, I definitely gotta say this is honestly a really amazing, concept. But I could definitely say the grammar was pretty good, as well as the sentence structuring and the storyline. And the fury behind all the characters in that, I could honestly see them all being very believable. We may never know if it's actually true or not. I mean, it's possible it could be true, but I guess the only thing we'll have to do is, we'll just have to find out for ourselves, because there's no really, actual, point on, actually assuming, unless it's said otherwise. But I guess with that being said, yeah, I actually could see these theories being, believable, and I could actually believe in them. So, yeah, I did remember reading this story, but I actually never did a narration of it till much later. So, yeah, which is here today. So I'm narrating it today because why not? So with that being the case and that being said, I'm just going to sit here and say it this right now. And like I'm always going to say, this is my before I get started. To the author of the story, I cannot seem to find out who you are. If you do know who you are, author, and you happen to be the author of the story, please let me know in the comments below, and then that way I'll be sure to give you proper credit then. But right now, I can't really say much about it at this time until I find out more. So, I guess with that being the case and with that being said, yeah. What did you guys personally think of this, story? But before I get on with that, I'm going to simply say this is just simply my own personal opinion, and if you happen to disagree with me, that's fine too. We're all entitled to our own opinions in regards to these creepypastas or Theorypastas, and this is simply my own personal thoughts. My final rating of this story is definitely a I'm gonna give this one a 10 out of 10. It's a pretty good Fury. It's well made in detail, and I honestly can see this being, a believable Fury. So, I guess with that being the case, that being said, what did you guys personally think of this story? Did you enjoy it? Did you not? Also, what we have done personally to help make this story a lot better. Feel free to leave me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. I'm the Lion Queen. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. And if you're new to my channel, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Ring the bell for notifications to when I upload, so that way you guys will not miss an upload. And as always, please roll the outro because I'm out.